Amen. Recording in progress. Okay, so if you want to know where we're at, we're in 2 Kings. 2 Kings 1 to 17. No, we're not going to read 2 Kings 1 to 17. It would take the next 50 minutes to do so. But if you read 2 Kings 1 to 17, those of you who did read it, you probably got lost in the morass of kings that were coming in and out, and most of them did poorly in the sight of the Lord. There were a few on that list that when you got there, they actually were anointed by God, and they actually did well in the sight of the Lord. But the Bible is quick to say, in spite of the fact that they did well in the sight of the Lord, they still allowed places in the land where idol worship still took place, even though they did well in the sight of the Lord. So one of the kings even killed all the prophets of Baal and their families and burned down the temple. And still it says in there, he did what the Lord said, and yet he allowed things to take place in the land that God didn't appreciate. And so we're in this morass, if you will, I call it morass, of kind of a mess of kingdoms that are going back and forth. And we're coming out of the days of Elijah, and we're going into the days of Elisha. So what I'd love to do is just kind of give you a background. And if you look at this map, and I apologize for the size, I almost printed off 100 copies, but I need that, I think. So when you look at this, you see the blue part in the middle, that's the kingdom of Israel. That's the northern kingdom. Okay, the capital of the northern kingdom was not Jerusalem, it was Samaria. Right, so you see the star up there where Samaria is. So back in the biblical times, when they talk about the northern kingdom, because in 1 Kings 1 to 17, they talk about Samaria a lot. And the reason they talked about Samaria a lot is because that's where the king of the northern kingdom lived, and that's where they worshiped, et cetera, et cetera. The red portion over there is Philistine country, and it runs down from Ashdod, Ashkelon, all the way down into Gaza. You guys know, obviously, where Gaza is based upon what's going on today, unless you haven't read a paper or watched the news in 4 years. That's where the red portion is. And then you got the king of Judah that's kind of in the pink section right there in the bottom middle. And Jerusalem's in the northern section of that. Now, people from the northern kingdom used to come to Jerusalem for worship at the high festivals. And some people were still true to that during this time period. And they would still come, but not everybody came because there was a split in the allegiances of the 10 tribes versus the 2 tribes. And so that's where it is. And then there was war between the kingdom of Judah. Hey, look at you, Lauren. 1980s technology right here. Seen one of these since Lauren made the presentation.
Ravco wanted us to get one of them.
Okay, well, Lauren, that's awesome. So the king of Moab is right there in the light purple. I feel like such a teacher. So the kingdom of Judah, and then there's this nice sea that separated the kingdom of Judah from the kingdom of Moab. But when they got mad at each other, they just kind of walked around. And then Jericho was this middle point, if you will, where Judah came in, Israel came in, the Aramean tribes would come over, the king of Moab. I mean, it was this crossroads, but it was also a mess. And so when you're reading in the Bible about this king did this and he's from Moab, well, there he is. And then Aramean, I had to look that up. Like, where's that? Where was the Aramean tribes? And well, hey, there it is right there. And so you got the kingdom of Ammon, which were the Aramean tribes. And then you got Aram is mentioned in here, which is up near Damascus. And so that's the mess that you've got going on during the what you read in about Elisha. And Elisha, he was involved in so much. So what I don't have time to do today, and we're not going to begin to do, is you're going to have, if you have a desire to read about which king did right in the sight of the Lord and which king didn't do right in the sight of the Lord, I would invite you to go back to the Clear Word Bible and read it, because in the Clear Word Bible, it is quite clear who did what well and who did what wrong. And to be honest with you, it's a little boring and tedious. It's like going through the highs and lows of the president of the United States for the last 35 years. Okay. And we can talk about that in class today, but the truth is that would be boring for us, because half of you would like one president, half of you would like the other. It would be a mess. And so what I want to do today is I want to take a little bit of, I want to spend most of our class on talking about Elisha, prophet. Make sense? Okay, good. Because I actually tried to go down the king route, and finally, after the fifth overhead, I said, nobody's going to care. So let's talk about the prophet's life for something in just a second. So listen, how would you have enjoyed being the prophet who took over from someone that was revered and who you saw ascend to heaven? So let's just, can we just understand this? I mean, you got the mantle, and Elisha, his father, because this was a young man, he called him his father. He said, "What can I do for you?" And Elisha really he wasn't stupid. He goes, "I'd like a double portion." Now let's understand, Elisha came from a wealthy family, and I've got that somewhere up here. Let me go for that just a second. Okay, so Elisha, when Elisha was called, the Bible said he was in the field with 12 yokes of oxen, and he was running the 12th bunch. And if you remember, the plowshare got burnt, they sacrificed, and he took off. Elisha was raised in a family of prosperity. I mean, a family of prosperity, a normal family wouldn't need 12 yoke of oxen to plow their fields, right? So this is like a farmer in North Dakota that's got 12 massive John Deere tractors or combines to take care of their fields. These people back then would have been what you'd call a wealthy person in life. So when Elijah got asked by Elisha for a double portion, that's in the framework of the oldest son in any wealthy family got the double portion of the inheritance. So if there were 5 sons and you were the oldest son, whether it was fair or not didn't matter. The oldest son, whatever the inheritance was, got twice, and then what was left was divided among everybody else. And so from his context, what he was asking for is I have traded in a life of wealth for a life of austerity. In my life of wealth, I would have been given a double portion. How about you give me a double portion of what God's already given you? Does that make sense from a framework perspective? So, number 2, how about the idea of trading in a life of prosperity with a life of austerity? Okay, so not only did you follow the person that got translated. So how many people have been translated other than Elijah? Enoch, according to the Bible? Enoch, and then Moses died. I don't quite understand why Moses had to die and be raised up. He kept himself from, in other words, I get that he hit the rock. Hitting the rock means you didn't go into the promised land. I don't understand why God had him die and raised him in 3 days. God will tell me one day. But I guess God just decided he couldn't do without Elijah in heaven. How does God decide, based upon a life of a human being, that I'm going to take that person to heaven with me as opposed to let them die? So Elisha got twice the portion because he actually did an amazing amount of work when he was here on campus in his back to teacher. Back inside the territory, And yet he was allowed to have a lingering illness that killed him in the natural course of life. And in his brain, he saw his mentor taken to heaven in a fiery chariot. That's pretty interesting when you put it in that context. How about the life of hard ministry in a divided nation with many kings, most of whom didn't follow God, and the lingering death that we've talked about? So let's talk about a couple more things. Let's see, did I cover all that? Double portion. Yes, I did. All right, let's go on to the next one. We've seen that. We've seen that. Okay, so if you read carefully, the Bible talks about Elisha's miracles. And Elisha had 14 miracles, and Elijah had 7 miracles recorded in the Bible. Now, I'm clear there are many more miracles. Okay, because I mean, it's like Jesus healing on this earth. You got X number of them in the Bible, but I'm clear it didn't scratch the surface of what he did when he was here. But Elijah and Elisha, from a biblical perspective, the double portion comes out as the biblical narrative has written it, because Elisha has twice the miracles that Elijah has recorded, and Elisha was multiplied. So he lived in a time of high political intrigue. He had an impact on the kings of many nations, and his efforts focused on about 4 big things: upholding and implementing divine justice. He performed lots of miracles, and I'm clear we didn't scratch the surface. He provided prophetic guidance, and you know, it's interesting. He didn't just provide prophetic guidance to one king. The nation, the kingdoms all around him recognized Elisha for who he was. And if you go back and read 1 Kings 1-17, you find the kings of other nations coming to ask for Elisha's opinion about a variety of things over the course of his life. So he had to have been revered, and he had to have been well known. And of course, he would have influenced political events. As a matter of fact, he actually was responsible for Jehu becoming the king. That was the one person that he did anoint to be the king. And the Bible actually says nice things about Jehu, even though he didn't do everything God wanted him to do. So if you go into the major miracles, my question for you is, how many of those miracles before you read the Bible, did you guys know about all those miracles? No? I bet you knew 3 of them.
The access.
You knew the axe head. What else did you guys know? Naaman.
The ones that are in the Bible story.
So my Bible friends. Okay. So I pulled out my Bible friends. There's 5 books. There's 4 stories in each book. There's 20 stories. And actually there's 3 of the 20 come right out of 1 Kings 1-17. And actually 4 of them do, because one of them is about King Joash restoring the temple. And so even though it's not about one of Elisha's miracle, those 17 chapters comprise a 5th of the stories that you read about to your children, about some of the biblical events that took place. And I found that very interesting. Yes, I still have my Bible friends. Yes, I'm still waiting for a grandkid. One of these days, that's going to happen. So, can we just talk a little bit about purifying the waters of Jericho? One of the first miracles. Jericho is with the crossword. What happened to the water in the well? I'm sorry? Yeah, it went bitter. And how did he solve that? A new bowl, which I don't quite understand, but that's what the Bible said. Bring me salt in a new bowl. And he prayed, dumped the salt in the water, and the water in that Jericho area, according to the Bible, stayed good for drinking, irrigation, and anything else they needed for the rest of its life. Now, I don't know if it's still there. You might know that, but I don't know. Let's talk about multiplying the widow's oil. Anybody know the story? Tell me the story. A lady was
in the last meal, find something, so.
Yeah, but what she was destitute.
And
And Elisha asked her, what do you have in your house that you could sell? She had only oil. And Elisha goes, go borrow all the pots you can borrow from all your neighbors that are empty. And the son went out, grabbed all the pots. He said, start filling them up. And she had oil in her purse to fill up the pots as long as there was a pot to fill up. Now it makes me wonder if she got enough pots. Because the oil didn't run out until she was filled up with the last pot. And then she sold that and she had enough money to care for her and her son as they went through that. All right, let's talk about the next one. The Shunammite woman is in two parts, really. So what's the first part of the Shunammite woman? In the My Bible Friends, it's all wrapped together.
Hospitality.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Shunammite woman and her husband were wealthy, and Elisha came through on a pretty regular basis. And according to the Bible and My Bible Friends, the Shunammite woman jabs her husband in the side and says, "Hey, doofus, let's build him a room on the top of the house." And he says, "Okay, go ahead." So she built him a room, put in a bed, a candlestick, a side table, and every time Elisha came through, he had a place to stay. One day he asked, "Is there anything I can do to help you?" And she goes, "No, I have everything I need." And she went downstairs, and his servant said, "Elisha, you dummy, haven't you figured out she's of an age and they have no son?" And Elisha went down and said, "Call her back." And she came back and he said, "A year from now, you're going to have a son." So like any good son, when they're out in the field, he's out in the field, he gets hot, has a heat stroke, something, and he dies. And she gets on a donkey, she goes and finds him, and he comes. What does he do first? Anybody know? He doesn't come back first. What does he tell his servant to do? Anybody not read this whole week? Am I the only person who read the stupid Bible? Come on, people. If I was teaching a class at school, I'd give you C's. He gave his servant his staff.
that's right.
And what he asked him to do, lay that staff where?
On the floor.
Across his face. Thinking his staff would have the power, but when he got there, it didn't happen. He laid down on that kid, and that kid was brought back to life. All right. We're talking about feeding of the 100 men. Just like Jesus fed 5,000 with a little bit of loaves and fishes, he did the same thing with a few loaves at the same time. Let's talk about Haman. Where was Haman from, sir? I'm looking at you. Haman. Yeah, Haman. Which country was he from?
Syria.
Exactly. Would a good Israelite have liked a visit from anybody from Syria? No. Okay. But the guy had leprosy and he had raided Israel and he had taken this little girl as a servant, according to My Bible Friends. And the little girl says to the mistress, if she'll go see my prophet, he'll be healed. So what did he take? When Naaman left, he took
Gifts.
gifts. How much gifts? Anybody know the net present value of today's money of those gifts? I bet you didn't do the math, did you?
2,130,000.
Wrong. Not even close. Somewhere between 75 and 125 million. Now, the Bible that my friend gave me said it's worth 750 million in American money today. That math doesn't work. So that must have been a biblical scholar coming up with that number, not an accountant. Because when I weigh the gold and run it at the current market value, and I weigh the silver and run it at the current market value, depending upon the current market value, what he offered to be healed in today's money is somewhere between 75 and 125 million. So when Elisha says, "I don't want your money," I want you to understand what Elisha turned down.
He had come from wealth, so he knew that.
And he had come from wealth, and he knew that being of means wasn't such a bad idea. So he turned that down. He told Naaman, "Go wash in a dirty river 7 times." Naaman went and washed after a little complaining. And his servant went to Naaman and said, hey, there's two people. How about 20% of the load? And they gave it to him. And of course, then I don't know, it doesn't say what happened to the money, but the person that actually got the money, the servant, got leprosy. And maybe he took the money and the leprosy. I don't know. But it was worth a fortune. And Elisha didn't take the money. So it's pretty remarkable. Loading of the axe head. Back in those days, they had schools of the prophets. One school of the prophet was jammed. It reminds me of Fleece. We need a middle school. Anybody? I'm putting in a plug, shameless plug. Okay. But they said, let's make it bigger. So they were cutting down trees near the river. One of the students had borrowed an axe. The axe head came off. He made the axe head float. There you go. And then blinding the army. As opposed to killing the army, he led them into Samaria, which I found very interesting. And then after he led them into Samaria, he opened their eyes and he asked the king to feed them and send them on their way. And it's just these miracles alone, and these are the only miracles we're going to talk about today, would have spread like wildfire throughout that time period. I mean, anybody that could do the types of things that he was doing had to have been somebody with a special gift from God. Okay. So Elisha did have impact. He had a lot of miracles done. He confronted idolatry consistently and religiously. And yet, he had a profound impact on many individuals, communities, and kings. But he had very little success in turning headstrong people away from their wicked ways and actually coming back to the Lord. So when I think about the ministry of Elijah and Elisha, and now we're going to get into some minor prophets that come by, it's not too many years from now before the kingdoms just get sacked. And when I mean sacked, I mean sacked. People carried off, Jerusalem leveled, the diaspora takes place. It's just done. And so at the end, he died of a long illness. And it's remarkable that they throw this story in. So a person has died. They're having a funeral. A war party's coming. They get hasty. They walk over and open a grave, and it just happens to be Elisha's, and toss in the dead body. The dead body hits Elisha's bones and comes back to life. Now, that sounds like a tall tale, and yet it's in the Bible. So, okay, now it's your turn. That's Elisha in 30 minutes. Yeah.
I'm just sitting here thinking, I wonder if there's any correlation between some of those miracles and Jesus' miracle.
Oh, man.
A fair amount of correlation.
Yeah.
Type of miracle that Elijah performed, that Jesus performed. So there's some prophecy in there somewhere.
I think that's probably right. You know, when you think about the fact that Elijah, as Cy taught last week, the impact as a frail human being he had on the nation at the time and still was afraid. I don't get the impression when I read about Elisha, he was ever afraid in any circumstance. Nowhere in the Bible do I read anything about Elisha being worried. He woke up in the city was surrounded, the servants having a cow. Elisha says, Lord, open his eyes so he could see. I think a double portion of the Holy Spirit that he gave Elisha put him on a plane of understanding that we don't understand today. He saw things other people didn't see. He knew things other people didn't know. Rich is almost like, as I was thinking through it, almost Jesus-like in how he understood people and what was coming next. And it was very interesting to me as I was thinking through that. I had came to the same conclusion you did.
Well, he's meeting their practical needs
Yes,
in many cases.
in many cases.
You know, healing of the boy, the water, food. Just go down the list.
Plus, he's giving kings advice on where to move their troops. Plus, he's doing this. Plus, he's doing that. Plus, other kings are coming for advice. Plus, he's healing somebody from Syria. I mean, it's amazing to me what he did while he was here. He was very open to everybody that needed his help. And he didn't need to see them to heal them. There's the other thing I found. In fact, in most accounts, Elisha stays in the room and has his servant tell the person what to do, including the Shunammite woman. Ask the Shunammite woman what it is she needs. She says nothing. And then he says, come on, man, she needs a kid. That's when he actually talked to her.
So that's just like on the Baptist house, the boy have one, or his gave him one, like that couple.
Just like that couple. Eric,
Three quick thoughts. First was he followed in Elijah and he saw that portion on Elijah. So he knew that portion was going to be with him. I think he had that connection. Two, when you talk about putting the staff on the boy's face, that didn't work. What worked, he prayed to the Lord. So that humility that it comes through the Lord, not through him. And then the third piece was the salt in the water. That's really interesting to me because we're told to be salt. And water is life because Jesus is life. And for us to be healed and cleansed, it comes from Jesus being the living water. So I kind of connected we're supposed to be salt to the world, and that to show people that true healing water comes from Jesus. And so I don't know, just as you were talking, those are just three thoughts that came to mind.
no, I think that's very rich. Thank you very much. Elmer.
As I read again, Elisha, I'm struck by the sense of humor that God has. When Elijah was called out the prophets of Baal and the pillars, and he said to them, you're not yelling loud enough. Yell a little louder. Your God doesn't hear you. And I kind of,
Maybe they're on vacation.
yeah, it's something.
Maybe they took a trip.
He kept bugging them. Anyway, Elisha didn't even come out and see this man that brought all these goods. And he must have smiled as God told him to bathe in the Jordan River, which he knew was muddy. And from what the description is, where he comes from, there are beautiful, he said that. Why couldn't I go back to where there are beautiful waters?
Beautiful waters.
So I think there's a smile on God's face when these things came to pass.
I do think God had a big sense of humor. Yes, and then I'll be right back. Yes.
I think it's interesting. You hinted at it quite a few times as Elisha's bulk of his ministry had to do with external. The external, and to the point where Jesus called it out. Like, there was a lot of people with leprosy, and God healed the Syrian, not the Jews. That say, hey guys, it's not just for you, it's for
everybody.
Yeah.
What I loved about the story of Elisha is that they in the first 17 chapters, they talk about all the kingdoms, they talk about the war, but they talk about the people coming to find Elisha because they knew who he was. And they knew that they really needed to understand Elisha could help them, which I found very fascinating. He was not singular to a group of people. He was there to service whatever was happening in that part of the world. Very good. Yes, right here, then back here.
So one thing that he didn't have a sense of humor about was when they made fun of him being bald.
That's true.
He was,
Hey, Baldy.
yeah, he was young, he was early in his tenure. And I guess he had to make an example because he had to have some respect here. You know, he represents God after all. And so he sicked the bears on them and killed them. And one thing we were struck with when we were reading these chapters was just how gory they are. You know, we're very glad we live now and not back then. But you know, he sicking bears. I look back to when I was in academy, and I was very skinny. Unfortunately, I'm not anymore. But I was teased terribly about being skinny. And boys in academy age, teasing, and so I can. But I mean, you just kind of think that was a pretty harsh punishment for teasing, but he represented God, so.
Yes, let's talk about this one a little bit, because I don't think Elisha called any bears out. I think God called the bears out, number one. Number two, the commentaries would tell you that those weren't little kids. They weren't 60, but they were not what we think of as an 8, 9, 10-year-old. These were people big enough to have known better, probably late teens, early 20s, according to the commentaries. And you're not wrong. God needed Elisha to have a certain amount of decorum and respect, and that's all it took. I mean, and I guess that's all it would take. But it's a harsh story in spite of that, from my perspective, based upon who we are and how we live. It's an extremely harsh story, and one that, from a human understanding, is hard to get through unless you think back about the fact that before we had the kings, we had a theocracy. And even though we had the kings, God wanted it to be a theocracy. And that was God's anointed person. And that's the only way I can figure this out in my own brain. Otherwise, it doesn't square. It's really rough. But I do want people to understand these are people that were of the age of majority that should have known better, and didn't. Yes, sir.
I look at Elisha, and when I read Bible story or whatever, and you find out about Gehazi, then you wonder, what kind of HR department did you have that you selected this guy or he selected you? But then you also look at the parallel that Jesus had Judas. And it's not a reflection of poor judgment in personnel. It is the grace that God offers to people like Gehazi and Judas that he's trying to win over. And he allows both of those men to see amazing miracles and amazing grace. It just doesn't win them over.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. You're hitting on something I desperately want to talk about. So he just watched his boss turn down $100 million. He goes, well, hang it. If you offered him $100 million, I can probably talk him out of $20 million. Now, so think about all of you. I won't ask a show of hands how many people have the 20 million in the bank, but it's not many of you. Okay, including me. So, from a human perspective, it just shows me that it would be hard. Let's just understand. It would be hard today for anybody in this room to go, you got to be kidding me. You just turned down $100 million. Okay, how about 20? Well, the guy that just got healed offered 100 million. So what's 20?
You give it to the school. The school.
Yeah, I'll give it to the school. A double time. Yeah. And yet Elisha's life was run not off of anything that somebody could pay him to do. He was a servant of God. God's gift was merited or it wasn't. And he gave it based upon that, not based upon what you could provide him. And it didn't matter. And I think that would have been hard for any of us. Listen, man, I thought through that a long time. $100 million in today's money, 20 million bucks, 10 million, 5 million. Pick a number. I mean, but he didn't heal him. See, there's the thing. God healed him. And you can't pay me for something that God's doing, because God's gift is free to you, just like it is to everybody else. I'm just a conduit. But I got to tell you, it would be hard if you had that kind of biblical power from God, not to get confused about where you leave and where God takes over. And then right here.
To his punishment, it's like, what was the punishment for taking the money? Or the punishment is he may have just blown the opportunity for a whole new group of people to realize who God is, which is kind of what Elisha did. It's like the healing is from God, it has nothing to do with your money. And then he goes back and says, yeah, he changed his mind. He wants $20 million. So, okay, now it is about the money. It's not, it takes away some of the impact of what God can do. It may have lost witness to, a whole nother country.
Yeah, what's really irritating to me is they don't tell me in the Bible what happened to the 20 million. I don't know if the guy died of leprosy rich. Or if they gave it to the prophets, or if they actually gave it back. It's very silent on that. And I want them to complete the story, because you can write the narrative however you want. Okay, who did I miss? Yes, right here.
Well, it's interesting that if Elisha was such a family of means, that he was in the field plowing. Now, whether that's just by choice because he wanted to work out or what, but he obviously knew of Elijah.
And he was prepared.
Yeah, because Elijah approached him and he didn't say a word. He just put his cloak on him. And he obviously understood the implications of that.
Yeah, so
how much stronger are we for Christ? Sometimes when we keep our mouth shut, we know for what we are, for what we say.
and the hope, and hopefully the answer is yes. But most of the time you're known for what you are, right? Well, consistently over time. Yes. I missed somebody? Yes. I can't wait for you and all of you to jump in. Go right ahead.
It's interesting because when we look at the story of leprosy, the one thing that comes to mind to me is this man was a general. He invaded their land, took a baby, destroyed, killed him. So Elisha knows the history. It's very painful. And it's very, I don't know, it's just devastating to him. So imagine now he comes. I would not accept even a penny from this man. I'd be like, you came, you killed, you took this young child. She's now serving you. And you want to pay me to do a miracle? That's the twist that I see.
You just sent him back to die with leprosy.
Say fine. But that's what she pointed.
That's actually not. That's the problem with the story of Nineveh that's coming up. That's what the prophet didn't want that city saved. I want fire and brimstone to come down, wipe this group of people out. And that would have been the human reaction.
Yes, that's why I think it was totally God. And that's why he wasn't even present there. He went because he knew God is merciful. He has grace over everyone. For me, it might be painful and I don't see a reason for him to be healed for no money. That's why he didn't want to touch it. He knew what type of God had a different plan for him.
Now, the Bible says that he took back as much dirt as donkey or mule could carry. And the commentaries say that what he did with that dirt is make them into mud bricks. And he made an altar of that. And he worshiped God on those mud bricks in his land where he was as a general in that country, which would have actually been quite remarkable for somebody of that. So from a mission perspective, my guess is Elisha lit a fire by healing Naaman, having God with Naaman, having take the dirt back and wash and worship the true God. And it doesn't say that he gave the little girl back. I want to finish the story. Every one of these, I want to finish the story. Well, you went back, you felt bad, and so you sent the little girl home. And you worship God the rest of your life. But we have to finish the story ourselves. It's just really interesting. They don't do enough narrative for me in some of these stories to finish them up. Yes.
But also part of that same story is the idea that here's a child that was taken and look what good came of it, how she was able to witness. Like true, God has a way of using circumstances the way he sees.
Reminds me of Joseph.
Yeah.
But you take a little girl, she must have been taken when she was old enough to understand who the true God was.
Right.
And she must have figured out that God was going to take care of her and she was going to be true to God in spite of that. That's pretty remarkable,
Daniel.
in my opinion. Daniel, Joseph. Yes, Carly.
Well, he must, even though he had taken her, that was just the way of the world and the way of the
It was.
world.
It was.
He must have been a nice enough man that she wanted to save him. Because she could have not
Said a word.
been, oh, good, this guy's gone. He's got leprosy.
Ate him.
He's out of my life now.
That's fair.
Leprosy's
You want-
contagious, so she's worried that she's gonna get sick.
Hear what she said? She said leprosy is contagious. Maybe she was just afraid she was gonna die too. Oh, that's rich. Yes, please.
I see a parallel with Miriam disrespecting
Okay,
her brother,
yes,
and she got leprosy.
yes.
But brother, who was a prophet, needed that respect of everybody and not criticism. And so God used that leprosy, but because she was healed, maybe Elisha prayed for Gehazi and he was healed. We don't know. The
We
rest
don't
of the
know.
story. There's a lot left.
We don't know the rest of the story on any of it.
Yep.
We get to, hey, go ahead. And then
I do love that God uses physical ailments as metaphors for sin and to help us see, because we need
Understand.
signs. And you know that Naaman had something. Whatever the leprosy is for Naaman, we don't know. But that leprosy gets transferred to Gehazi when Gehazi reveals like the depths of his heart. And so now we who are in preschool, gospel, elementary school, we are able to now understand the sin that we see as a spiritual thing. God shows you as a physical thing, and it just makes it easy for us.
the narrative's much easier to follow. Carlene, and then back here.
Those are children. I could find the chapter. So it says we don't kill the children. In the spoils of war, but yet,
They take them.
no, but yet in other lessons back, because they didn't kill the children and the women, the kings were destroyed, or they didn't follow God's command.
So
This was a very big difference. Elisha says we don't kill the children, but yet they did kill the children, and that was a command.
it was a command when the children of Israel first got to Israel that everything wiped out, including livestock.
Mhm.
There was also
Right.
a command when they were walking through the desert. That was, you do not punish the son for the father's sin. So they talk about both of those in Kings, and when Oleg teaches next, he can separate it out for you. Now you're above my pay grade. It is juxtaposed, and working that narrative out is something we'll ask Oleg to do. Yes.
One of my favorite also, when Elisha, they were surrounded, and the servant said, wow, what are we gonna do now? Where are we gonna go? And that's what most of the time as a person, we focus so much on the problem,
The thing we can't see.
the things that we cannot see, and we forgot that we have a bigger God
Yeah.
that is getting ready. Hey, all you have to do is ask me for the solution. But sometimes we focus on the so much problem in our lives that we forgot that we have a bigger God that is getting ready to answer us the answer or the question that we need,
Yes.
the answer that we need.
And this is a person that had been with Elisha for a long time and seen many, many things and was still worried. And it's just a human being. Like I said, I think Elisha, like Jesus, I never found Jesus afraid in the New Testament. I can't find a text anywhere that talks about Jesus being afraid of anything, anyone, any circumstance or situation. Nor can I find that about Elisha anywhere doing anything ever. Elisha was clear that God was going to take care of it. And I think he saw things that other people couldn't see. And I'm clear Jesus knew things and saw things that other people couldn't see. It's still a mystery to me. I don't understand it. And I can't explain. So look, here's some thoughts. And yeah, I need to let you go. In spite of Elisha's status, he was actually ready for God's call. So, you know, he had to have been a man of God before Elijah ever walked up, or Elijah wouldn't have walked up. Okay, so he was ready for God. Number two, he was with Elijah a long time, and he saw and heard and knew what Elijah was capable of. And he knew he needed God's power if he was going to be next in line. He was faithful to God. I don't find a place anywhere in the Bible where it talks about him worrying or not being faithful to God. He spent his entire life bringing justice and God's will to the nations. And he did it for very little money and for very little fame, other than the fame that people gave him. We're going to be remembering him as a prophet that God truly blessed. And yet, in spite of that influence, in spite of that person that was there at time, living, breathing, where people could see, they largely ignored what was going on. The parallel for us today is the same. They're just as human as we are today. Our issues are no different than their issues back then. We're just as susceptible to the same tendencies of idolatry, greed, isolationism. I can go down the list as people were in the Bible. It's made me think this week about who it is and where it is and how it is I interrelate with the people around me. And much like what Sai said last week, how do you, in a world that you find yourself in, end up being the person that's the least afraid, the least negative, the most positive human being that other people have ever met, in spite of what's going on around us in today's world? What are we afraid of that we don't need to be afraid of? And so I hear people say to me all the time, well, the world's going to come to an end because of this. And I'm like, yeah, okay, great. I really am. I'm like, okay, cool. That's fine with me. I think living up there is going to be a lot better than living down here. And if you're right, God bless you. But if you're wrong and we still live another 150 years, we still have to live another 150 years. And how do you as a human being go through your life the way Elijah and Elisha went through their life, being the least afraid, most positive, quite frankly, the most prolific when it comes to having somebody watch your life and know that you trust in God the way they did back then? And that's the lesson for me today. What are you afraid of that you don't need to be afraid of? If God opens your eyes when you were afraid, what would you see? And for me, most things start with fear. The fear that I don't have enough money. The fear that I may be unpopular. The fear that the person that I'm talking to won't understand. The fear that if I take this risk, something bad's going to happen. Most of life, when you really analyze the things you don't do, are fear-based, not another-based. And it makes me wonder if I couldn't free myself up just a little bit, if I had a little closer connection and had a little less fear. Tim, fine, you have a comment?
Oh, I think that's
Erica?
no. I was just thinking, like, Jesus didn't have fear, but I really love that he was begging God to take the cup from him. begging. And in spite of that pain, he was like, all right, let's do it.
I'll take it.
And so he lived in that tension of like not being afraid, but it just being so stinking hard. And so he gave us that truth.
I don't think Elisha's life was that particularly easy.
That he had those like, come on, God, like, please take it away. But all right, let's do it.
Just to follow up what Erica's talking about, Jesus begging God to take this cup. I invite you to come to the next service because it's all music. And that's one of the most beautiful anthems that we will sing. Thy will be done, which is God's answer to that question. Thy will be done. You'll love the song. The FLA choir with our choir, we're singing the large group. You're going to love the music. If you don't come, at least listen to it online.
All right. So guys, who's teaching next week? Nobody. Quick question. Who's teaching in 2 weeks? All right, Lauren. We'll see everybody back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much. Have a great week. Have a great 2 weeks.
Summary. Thank you.